like to give a special thanks to Magic X Beats, produced this track. Proclaim your nationality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I'm an everlasting spirit.
Thank you for tuning in to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including Land of the Free, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That is SHEM-EL.com. And you will also be able to get many other items from my website as well. And I also, before we begin, would like to let the public know that I will be a chairman in hosting a social economic conference, for 2022. January 2022 in Durham, North Carolina. We don't have the exact date yet, but be on the lookout. We will have that, and it is open for the public to attend, where we are really talking about solutions, not just complaining about the problem. So with that, I would like to begin, and I thank each and every one of you for listening to. I'd like to thank all of my supporters, those who have been continuing to listen to this show up until this point. Thank you all. I appreciate the support. On today's topic, we will be talking about the aspect of voting rights. Voting rights, and what does nationality have to do with that? What role does that play? Does nationality play in terms of voting rights? And why voting rights is so important, and the history of voting rights in America, particularly when it comes to the section of America that has been labeled historically within America as Negro, Black, Colored, and now African American. So that being said, what I like to do is actually just kind of give some background. This particular episode is inspired by a recent march that took place in reference to voting rights that was actually done commemorating the anniversary of the March on Washington. And there were some big names in the civil rights, within the civil rights activists, among civil rights activists, children of civil rights activists, such as Martin Luther King III, who was the son of Martin Luther King Jr., the famous Martin Luther King Jr. of the civil rights movement in the 60s, Reverend Al Sharpton, and there were a host of others who participated in this march in this year of 2021. And it's very interesting that this is taking place, of course, in light of today's politics with the pandemic, also with police brutality, still on a rampage, still running high, though it may not be covered as much. And now with the other talk about things such as critical race theory, this is a very interesting addition to it. And we're going to actually explore the history of that aspect of the voting rights. There's a lot of controversy. People are saying, some people think that voting doesn't matter. Some people think that their vote does not count. Some would say that voting is a hoax. And you have those like Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, who say vote or die. Regardless of what you think, what position you take with this, there's definitely a history to this, and there's an aspect of this that's not really spoken about in depth. And we really need to get involved with that and start talking about those things that they're not putting on the mainstream news in terms of what is this voting rights about and how does this tie into nationality? Because remember, as I always say, nationality determines political status. And part of politics is voting. So how does nationality help with that? So we're definitely going to get into that. But before we get into that, we'll take a brief pause for the cause. But when we come back, we will continue our discussion. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. We'll be right back after the break.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, be sure to connect with us on Facebook at WDRB Media and follow us on Instagram at WDRBmedia.radio
for double the information and inspiration.
The voice of the community. Voice of the community.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community. And those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Higher Self, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. So thank you for coming back. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about voting rights. Okay. And as I mentioned, this particular episode is inspired by the recent event of marching. There was a march on voting rights. And what I'm going to do is actually read from a CBS News article on cbsnews.com pertaining to it. And the title of it is "We Are Not Going to Stop. Thousands Gather for Annual March On for Voting Rights." So it says, some 58 years after the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech at the first March on Washington, his son, Martin Luther King III, and other activists and advocates participated in the March On for Voting Rights in the nation's capital on Saturday. The subsequent rally in D.C. and other cities across the U.S. called on the federal government to protect and expand voting rights. People gathered for the Washington March early Saturday, and a rally ran until the afternoon. An estimated 50,000 people attended. Okay. And then it said at the first march on Washington in 1963, an estimated 250 people gathered to demand civil rights. This year, the march, organized by Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network and 180 partner organization, in part calls on the Senate to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2021. Quote, "We will not stop until we protect our right to vote," unquote, Sharpton said Saturday. Okay. Now it says that the act, which passed the House, 219 votes in favor to 212 votes against, on Wednesday would reinstate a provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The For the People Act, another voting rights measure that would overhaul the nation's voting laws, is also pending in the state, albeit blocked by a Republican filibuster. Okay. So it goes on and on, but just to be clear, what we're looking at here is people marching for voting rights. Basically, to be clear, we're talking about the population that is classified as Black or African American, that the voting rights of them be protected. Now, this is to be understood how important this is, okay? Now, this is something that we really need to get into. And the reason why I want to really get into this is because we have to actually understand what it is that voting rights are. What does that even mean to have voting rights? Because, again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of people who don't really know what this means. Why would there be first off, the first thing that should come to mind is that if in 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King already spoke about voting rights, then the question should be, okay, why is there a situation where people are still voting, or I should say still marching for this? Why is that the case? Why is that the case? Okay. So I want to give context to this, right? Now, there's many people who are under the impression, and to no fault of their own, because they've been told this, that before the civil rights movement, our people, basically melanated people here in this country, basically could not really vote. You know, even though the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was passed, we still was held back from voting. Okay. Now, what they don't tell you in mainstream media, and they definitely do not tell you in the school system, is that in actuality, there were those of us in our community who actually had political power and were able to vote, despite the racism, despite the white supremacy, despite the Jim Crowism, right? And it all ties into a man who lived in Chicago, was born in the state of North Carolina, but lived in Chicago and started a movement. That man's name is Noble Drew Ali. He started the Moorish movement, or is also known as the Moorish Divine National Movement, in 1913. Originally started it in Newark, New Jersey, and then he relocated in Chicago. And again, you've heard me, for those who have been listening, they've heard me mention about him before, and I will keep mentioning about him because this is a piece of history they are not telling you. They'll always put certain people in front and have that name put before you. But men such as him, they all but wipe him clean out. You know, they try to make him a mystery, unknown. So I am actually going to read something. It's a section of this particular, it's actually a book that came out, a pamphlet that was called Moorish Literature. And Moorish Literature is a set of articles that come from a newspaper, Moorish Guide, which Noble Drew Ali was editor-in-chief of. It was a newspaper put out by his organization, known as the Moorish Science Temple of America. And to be clear, you know, this wasn't just for members of his organization. This was for the public. So he was very involved in politics, as I will reveal shortly. But in it, there's an article that was called "A Divine Warning by the Prophet for the Nations." Now, he was revered by members of his organization as a prophet. So you may hear the term prophet used, and that's to that point. But I'm just going to read a section of this information here. Okay. This is just a small paragraph. It says, there is but one issue for them to be recognized by this government and of the earth, and it comes only through the connection of the Moorish Divine National Movement, which is incorporated in this government and recognized by all other nations of the world. And through it, they and their children can receive their divine rights, unmolested by other citizens, that they can cast a free national ballot at the polls under the free national constitution of the state's government, and not under a granted privilege, as has been the existing condition for many generations. This was in the 1920s when this was published. I'll read another article. And this article is entitled Political Slavery, from the same newspaper. Okay? It says here, anytime a man or a woman fails or refuses to cast a sacred ballot at the polls, they separate themselves from all rights of an American citizen. For surely this is the one connecting medium for a citizen to this nation, to his nation. They become no more than related beasts of burdens. There are reasons why certain classes who are more or less independent take no part in politics, since they say they get nothing out of such in the way of material gain. This is no less than a political slave, since they refuse to voice their sentiments at the polls. Another form of political slavery is probably more prevalent among the less independent classes, is that being forced into one of the major parties, and they're bribed, coerced, or otherwise forced to vote the wishes of someone else, regardless of their own minds, before they can be general relief for the economic good of all. All forms of political slavery must be abolished, and every citizen must take his part in the affairs of the nation. That was an article entitled Political Slavery, written in the 1920s. This is 30 years, at least 30 years before the Civil Rights Movement. Now, if it was impossible for us to participate in politics, why would he mention in 2 articles in his newspaper about politics, about voting? Wouldn't he have said, we need an opportunity to vote, please let us vote? What did he know that everybody else didn't know? Not only that, here's the history that they don't teach you. He lived in Chicago, Illinois. He, in the first annual convention of his organization, invited a man who was running for Congress. His name is Oscar the Priest. Noble Drew Ali gathered thousands of people, not hundreds, thousands of people, to do what he said would be done, which is use a free national ballot, what they call today a voting block, and voted en masse, and was able to put Oscar the Priest in office. And that made him make history, insofar that Oscar the Priest, in the history books, is considered to be the first African American to be elected into Congress, to be put into Congress since Reconstruction. They don't tell you that. This happened in Chicago, and it happened because of a man named Noble Drew Ali. But yet and still in 2021, we have still got our people out here marching for voting rights. And we're going to get into that Voting Rights Act a little more, right? But before we do that, we are going to take a quick pause for the cause. But after the break, we will continue our discussion. You are tuned into WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
Check it out.
Hi, everyone. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook
at WDRB Media and follow us on Instagram at WDRB Media Radio
for all your updates, informations, and inspiration.
You're listening to WDRB Media, the voice of the community.
Welcome back to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including How Many Days Are in the Circle, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And also, just to remind you, we are having a social economic conference in Durham, North Carolina in January 2022. You are all welcome. And as time progresses and details develop, I will give you those details as to specific date, time, and location. So if you're just joining us, we are discussing voting rights and nationality. And what role does nationality play in voting? So I went into a couple of things. I went into the history of Noble Drew Ali in the 1920s, his organization, and the role he played in getting Oscar the Priest into Congress. Oscar the Priest being recognized in history as the first African American to be elected into Congress since Reconstruction. So the Reconstruction period, of course, is that period right after slavery officially ended in 1865, where many men who were classified as Negro back then, who were put into political positions, basically into Congress, to be specific. But that said, I also went into an article that was in the Moorish Guide back in the 20s, two articles actually. One of them entitled Political Slavery, which was so relevant today. I mean, when you really think about what's going on today, the whole controversy about voting, that was back then, that was talked about then back in the 20s. And supposedly during that time, supposedly have them tell it, you know, we couldn't even vote. But he was speaking in such a matter-of-fact way as to voting, like, yeah, we do vote, and this is what's going on in the political scene. What was that missing key? Why are people today still trying to vote, or shall I say march for voting rights? We're going to get into that. So that missing key is none other than nationality. Nationality determines political status. And I've been saying it before, and I will always say it. Nationality determines political status. Nationality, by definition in law, is the quality and character that arises from a person belonging to a nation. And a nation is a people existing in the form of a free jural society. Okay? So putting that into context, when you go back to that paragraph in that article, a divine warning by the prophet for the nations, where Noble Drew Ali is speaking about divine rights on one end, the people having divine rights through nationality, and those who don't and have granted privilege. Right in civil society, according to law, is an entitlement, is what you're entitled to have. So what people don't realize, to put it into context, is that what people are calling rights are not even rights. They are granted privilege. And a privilege that's granted can be revoked. What a lot of people don't know, this, is that the Voting Rights Act, specifically the Civil Rights Act in general, but the Voting Rights Act in particular, is voted on every 25 years. It is voted on every 25 years to be extended. If you don't believe me, I'll read this article for you. I'm going to read this article. This article actually comes from NAACP. Okay. And this was dated in 2006. Okay. And basically the article is entitled Case, Political Participation Case, Voting Rights Act Reauthorization 2006. It says, on July 27, 2006, President Bush became the fourth president to extend core temporary enforcement provisions of the Voting Rights Act and the second to sign a 25-year extension. Let me stop there. That's just the first sentence. I'm going to repeat that and let that sink in. On July 27, 2006, President Bush, right? That's George W. Bush, the son, became the fourth president to extend core temporary enforcement provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and the second to sign a 25-year extension. Temporary enforcement provisions, not permanent, temporary. That means ain't nothing permanent about if you labeled as a Negro, Black, colored, or African American. Nothing's permanent about you voting. These rights that they calling about, nothing's permanent about. They're temporary, and you getting 25-year extensions. It's not in perpetuity. It's not forever. You got a limitation on that. That's just the first sentence. I can go on with this, but it's a reauthorization bill. So it says, according to this article, that since 1965, the act has enabled millions of African American, Latino, Asian American, and Native American citizens who were previously denied access to the ballot and equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Okay. What they did not state, as I stated, is that there were people as far back as the 1920s who had access to the vote and were not denied because they operated off a free national ballot. They operated off of their nationality and voted using their nationality. They didn't vote as Negro, Black, or colored people. They didn't vote like that. They didn't vote as that. They voted under their nationality, the nationality that they proclaimed. Okay? Simple as that. Okay? So now I gave you the information showing that one, that the myth about us not being able, melanated people not being able to vote prior to the 60s. And then I smashed the myth about the Voting Rights Act having any permanence to it, which, kind of makes sense now that you read the article again. If you read that article, that CBS News article again about them marching for voting rights, because Reverend Al Sharpton is saying we're not going to stop. Yeah, you can't stop if you're operating on the Negro, Black, and colored. You can't stop. You got to keep marching. You don't have to do that when you have a nationality, because that falls under human rights and actually divine rights. So we're getting from divine and human rights, birth rights, to granted privilege, which they're calling civil rights. That's how far we're falling into. We're just begging. Our people are now begging to get acceptance, begging for these privileges. When if you operate within your nationality, you have rights, human rights, you have divine rights, you have birth rights. That's what nationality does for you. Because again, as I've mentioned before, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is recognized by the United Nations, it states that every person has a right to a nationality. That's how important nationality is. That is within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It didn't say race. It didn't say you have a right to be whatever race you want, or us to recognize your race as Black people or white people or whatever. No, it says nationality. Every person has a right to a nationality. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into an article. I wrote an article with a blog website known as MoorishaMericanNews.com, and you might still be able to get this article. This article I published in October 22nd in 2014, so that was some time ago. The title of this was called More Money, MMOOR, More Money, right? And this was a continuation of another article where it was called More Money Exposing the Myths. So in this article, I was speaking about some of the myths that are prevalent. So I'm going to read some of this, okay, to give you context. And a lot of it is stuff that I've already just mentioned earlier. So it says, myth number 4, the Black vote benefits us. One of the biggest myths that we believe is that we receive direct benefits from our votes. Since receiving suffrage rights in 1869, there is not a single instance where a national political party or a national candidate has promised and delivered benefits to so-called Black voters for their electoral support. Candidates and national political parties consistently promise these voters nothing, and that is exactly what they always get. And just a side note, this speaks to the other article that I read, Political Slavery. Keep that in mind. I'll continue. While so-called Black voters continue to have the highest group voter turnout, none of them can make a legitimate claim that they have ever received a fair shake for their votes. They get nothing for their votes for a number of reasons. First, so-called Black leaders don't negotiate for their people. Even former President Bill Clinton publicly expressed surprise that these so-called Black leaders never demanded anything for the Black vote. Instead of receiving benefits for their votes, politicians give so-called Black voters a bunch of feel-good speeches. Let me stop there. Case in point, President Joe Biden. There is an audio that's out like right before he was inaugurated into being a president. He went through the inauguration. A leaked audio of him talking to civil rights leaders, and they're asking him to pass a bill pertaining to police brutality. And he flat out said no in so many words. You can check it up. It's on YouTube. But within his first 100 days, he passed, and I've mentioned this before, he passed the anti-Asian hate bill. And these civil rights leaders, the what is classified as the African American vote was the highest vote turnout for him. They helped put him in. And he straight up denied them. You know what he gave them? He gave them Juneteenth, a national holiday that a lot of people didn't even know existed. Okay? I can actually go on and on with this one. And so I'm really going to go in. But I just want that to let that sink in. I think I mentioned that before. But that's first. Okay? Let me continue on with the article. It says, secondly, it is often stated that the voting is a sacred right because a vast number of blacks gave up their lives for the right to vote. This is not true. No black ever sacrificed his or her life for the right to vote. In the 1950s and 1960s, many melanized people who were labeled as Negro, Black, and colored had their lives taken from them while seeking voting rights under the terms that delude to slavery. So this is the point. Listen to what I'm saying. Many people say, well, we gave up our lives to vote. Black, our ancestors died for the right to vote. Oh, they were trying to vote. In the process, they got killed. They didn't willingly come up there, I'm going to go ahead and give my life for this. They didn't want that. See, that's again, the narrative, the false narrative that's pushed. Okay? Now, here's the continuation of the article. In fact, in the 1920s, and I spoke to this, Noble Drew Ali was successful in politically mobilizing Moorish Americans within the Moorish Science Temple of America and launching voter registration drives in which Moorish Americans voted under the free national ballot. The Moorish American votes led to the election of Oscar de Priest, who is recognized in history as the first African American congressman since Reconstruction. This took place more than 30 years, that's 3 decades, 30 years before the Civil Rights Movement. Okay? So, again, and I go on and on, but with this. But my point of it is that with that stated, nationality is the missing key. And until we are honest about this, in speaking to what's going on here, going on, locking hands and saying we shall overcome, singing Negro spirituals and all that, those days are over. I'm sorry if I hurt anybody's feelings, but the truth is the truth. We have to get our political status and operate within our political status. And that's what this upcoming socioeconomic conference is all about. We got to take the first step, though. We have to proclaim our nationality. And we are going to go more into this. But before we get into the last part of our show and conclude, we're going to take a quick pause for the cause. However, after the break, we will continue and close out. You are tuned in to WDRB Media, the voice of the community, the only station giving you double the information and inspiration. Do not go anywhere because we will be right back.
I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I'm an everlasting spirit personality, man. Sooner control elements whenever I balance my span. Nationality is precious for your national redemption. We come out of the dead tents gathered up at the entrance. Newcastle, it was musical district number 1. And for the Vienna Convention, the treaty up on these punks. According to the 805 Illinois Compound Statute, the Religious Corporation Act. If you don't know, you like truth. The statute created the Moorish Science Temple charted that Shuali still issues by his signature. He brought us accepted a straw man for value, therefore he redeemed mine. Talking about the corpus, so being conveyed the lean dies. Prophet was brilliant, ladies. Microdot, archangel, devils notice, there was notice. They received a low grade blow, and then the beast had no understanding. The revelation spewed water at humanity. Amarast is the statement. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. Standing here, looking at my Moorish flag, old glory, no story. Into the ground it goes back, into the old northwest and southwest and make some territory. No such thing as U.S. citizen, historical enforcement. Though everything is voluntary though, you're suffering by the buck and resolutions you don't dare to know. I'm rapping while I'm here to verify. 13, 14, 15, the amendment was never ratified. To my black people, where your free national name was at? Cause attached with that, seemed like your own mental brain was snatched. Like Malcolm X told you many times, where was your heritage? Pick up a book and put down the alcoholic beverages, but don't stop it all at once. You get internally damaged, example your lungs and kidneys while growing up on campus. It's time to get back to the national affairs of men. I'm talking business, watch by action, with self-accredited. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, but not a U.S. citizen. My life's embarrassing enough, this my political status. In order to evolve, members should conduct themselves by the Constitution and bylaws. Act 6 is to proclaim no Bujualis pointed to by an amendment. Shoot is where I've been appointed to. The language of the 805 is key to the 1099. So just get behind the profit and corporation design, cause it's time, it's long. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to
Welcome
have
back
an
to
actuality.
WDRB Media, the voice of the community, and those streaming live through free TuneIn radio app and through iHeartRadio. You are listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L. I'm the author of several books, including What is the Devil Sometimes Called, which you can purchase on my website, sheml.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. And if you are just tuning in, we are discussing voting rights and nationality. What are voting rights and how does nationality play a part in this? So previously, I was actually discussing about, I was reading from my article that I did back in 2014 about voting. And I went into the aspects of the misconception that the Black vote historically has benefited us collectively. And let me be clear when I say that. I'm not trying to be condescending of the efforts of our people who have really tried to make a difference. I respect it. Let me be clear on that. What I am saying is that has not benefited us the way it should have, because we do not, for the most part, most of our people do not have the political status due to not having a nationality. They have no understanding, no comprehension of what nationality is and how it actually works. That's what I'm saying. Now, what is very significant as to why we receive few benefits from our vote is because, historically, there is a direct connection between political power and the strength of the economic resources that a group controls. Now, that group is a group of having one nationality. I want you to keep this in mind. There's a direct connection between political power and the strength of economic resources that a group controls. We cannot demonstrate control of enough economic resources to persuade candidates or political parties. Okay? Thus, the political slavery, as I mentioned before. And we have to be clear on that economic empowerment is very key. So think about it like this. Control of economic resources is powerful enough to overshadow a small voting population. Political power and benefits always follow the numbers. Those who are classified as Black or African American are considered to be only 12% of the general U.S. population. Now you can add or take away a percentage in there, a couple of percentage in there, but around 12%. Okay, so in racial context, the only way that we can expect to receive benefits from our vote is to first build and control our own economic structure. And we build and control our own economic structure based on our nationality. Thus, because you have to have boundaries within it. All other groups do this. Like I said, everyone has their communities. Chinatown, Korea, Little Korea, Little Italy, all these groups, all these nationalities build first within their community. They keep their dollar circulating amongst themselves. Then we can use our economic power to support, lease, purchase, or whatever these politicians who will support our group interest, our group self-interest. In politics, this is called lobbying. So basically, we have not been effective in lobbying because we don't have the political status. And that political status is established through our nationality. And there's so much more we can get into that, but I definitely just want to drive home the importance of the nationality, okay? Because politics is a process, okay? So in conclusion, all these myths that are floating around about the voting and stuff like that without proper knowledge of history is keeping us from galvanizing around a common self-interest. And that common self-interest should be our nationality, okay? So once we focus on that, we can move past these myths and these social illusions, okay? And really, truly empower ourselves, okay? So I thank you all for listening and tuning in. So be sure to join us next week as we tackle another topic for another time. And once again, thank you. Continue to tune in every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And please remember to connect with me by going to wdrbmedia.com. You can go download the iHeart Radio app and follow WDRB Media to check me out every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, if you want to be a guest on the show and talk about nationality, then feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me on my website, shemel.com. That's SHEM-EL.com. You've been listening to What is Your Nationality? And I'm your host, Shem L, on WDRB Media, the voice of the community for double the information and inspiration. Until next week, continue to be blessed. And remember, nationality is the order of the day. And if you do nothing else, proclaim your nationality. Peace and love.
My nationality, I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I'm an everlasting spirit personality, man. Sooner control elements whenever I balance my span. Nationality is precious for your national redemption. We come out of the dead tents gathered up at the entrance. Newcastle is Brussels, Mexico, District Number 1. And for the Vienna Convention, the treaty up on these punks. According to the 805 Illinois Compound Statute, the Religious Corporation Act. If you don't know, you lack truth. The statute created the Morbid Science Temple charted that Shuali still issues by his signature. He brought us accepted a straw man for value, therefore he redeemed mine. Talking about the corporate soul being conveyed, the lean dies. Prophet was brilliant, babies. Microdot, archangel, devils noticed, that was noticed. They received a low grade blow, and then the beast had no understanding. The revelation spewed water at humanity. Amaras the statement. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance. Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would have thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. Standing here, looking at my Morse flag, old glory, no story. Into the ground it goes back, into the old north, west and southwest and make some territory. No such thing as U.S. citizen, historical enforcement. Though everything is voluntary though. You're suffering by the buck and resolutions you don't dare to know. I'm rapping while I'm here to verify. 13, 14, 15, the amendment was never ratified. To my black people, where your free national name was at? Cause attached with that, seemed like your own mental brain was snatched. Like Malcolm X told you many times, what was your heritage? Pick up a book and put down the alcoholic beverages. But don't stop it all at once, you get internally damaged. Example, your lungs and kidneys while growing up on campus. It's time to get back to the national affairs of men. I'm talking business, watch by action, with self-accredited. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, but not a U.S. citizen. My life's embarrassing enough, this my political status. In order to evolve, members should conduct themselves by the Constitution and bylaws. Act 6 is to proclaim noble dualities pointed to by an amendment. Shoot is what I've been appointed to. The language of the 805 is key to the 1099. So just get behind the profit and corporation design, cause this time is long. I never would've thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would've thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would've thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality. I never would've thought it would be this way, to proclaim my nationality. I got a birthright inheritance Europeans don't want you to have an actuality.
Know the song about it? Like the hit? Here it go. Free your mind.